Here is something most people calling the U.S. housing market frozen missed last month. In May of 2026, existing home sales actually rose by 3.2%, both month-over-month and year-over-year. Mortgage rates ticked down to about 6.44%, lower than they were a year ago. The affordability index, the thing that tells you whether the median household can actually buy the median house, improved across every region in the country. And the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors used the word that has not been allowed in this conversation for nearly 3 years. Improving. This is not the story you have been told. The story you have been told is that the market is broken. Permanently broken. That nothing will sell. That nobody can buy. That the entire system is frozen in some kind of grotesque equilibrium. And for most of 2023, 2024, and 2025, that story was substantially correct. What almost no one is telling you, because it does not get clicks and because the people whose business depends on either panic or euphoria have no incentive to tell you, is that the freeze is quietly cracking. Not melting. Cracking. There is a difference. And if you are someone trying to make a real decision about housing in 2026, the difference matters more than almost any other number you will read this year. I am Jenna, and on this channel we do not panic and we do not cheerlead. We read the actual data, the kind the headlines either miss or skip past because nuance kills engagement. Today we are doing exactly that with the U.S. housing market. What changed? What did not? What is genuinely different in 2026 than it was last year? And whether any of that actually fixes the math for the person looking at a listing tonight wondering if they should give up. Let us start with where the numbers actually sit, because almost every viral housing video you have seen is working from data that is now 6 to 18 months stale. The median existing home sold in May of 2026 went for $434,300. That is up 1.3% from a year ago. It is the 35th consecutive month of year-over-year price increases. Prices did not crash. They did not even meaningfully soften nationally. They just kept grinding upward at a slower pace. Mortgage rates. The 30-year fixed averaged 6.44% in May. A year ago it was 6.82. The Freddie Mac weekly survey has been bouncing between 6 and 7% for nearly 3 full years now, but the recent direction has been gently down. The chief economist at the National Association of Realtors is now using the phrase, and I am quoting, essentially at the long-term historical average, which sounds like a sane statement and is also a statement that would have sounded delusional in 2021 when the same person was watching 2.65% rates. Sales pace. For 0.17 million homes sold on an annualized basis. That is the highest level since December. It is up 3.2% both month-over-month and year-over-year. Inventory sits at 4.5 months of supply. 6 months is the textbook definition of a balanced market. 3 months means it is a seller's market. 4.5 is what you call a market that is, slowly and reluctantly, finding its footing. Now stop and notice what just happened in the data. Prices up, rates down, sales up, inventory closer to balanced. In any normal market, that is what the beginning of a thaw looks like. Not a boom. Not a rescue. A thaw. So why does this still feel impossible if you are trying to buy a house right now? Because the headline thaw and your personal math are two entirely different things. The market can be improving on every macro indicator and still be completely unaffordable for the specific person trying to enter it. Both of these statements can be true at the same time, and both of them are true at the same time. Let me show you what the math actually looks like for the buyer, who is the entire reason this video exists. Take the median home price, $434,000. Standard 10% down payment, so you are bringing $43,400 to closing. Your mortgage is $390,900. At 6.44% on a 30-year fixed, your principal and interest payment is around $2,450 a month. Add property taxes that probably run around $350. Insurance, which depending on your state runs anywhere from $150 to $400. A realistic maintenance reserve at about $300. You are looking at total monthly housing cost in the neighborhood of $3,300 before you have furnished a single room. The household income required to comfortably carry that, using the long-standing rule that housing should not exceed 28 to 30% of gross income, is around $130,000 a year. The median U.S. household income in 2026 is closer to $84,000. The gap is roughly $46,000 between what the median American household earns and what the median American household needs to earn to actually afford the median American house. That gap is the entire story. The thaw is real. The affordability index is improving. Sales volume is genuinely picking up. And the gap is still there. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it is one of the strangest situations in modern American economic history. The market is getting better, and most of the people who need it to get better cannot tell, because the improvement is happening at a level too small to reach their kitchen table. How did we end up here? The sequence is worth walking through, because once you see it, the current market stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like the predictable output of a chain of decisions, none of which were crazy in isolation, all of which combine to produce a market that is functionally rigged against new entrants. Spring 2020. The Federal Reserve cuts its benchmark rate to near zero and begins buying mortgage-backed securities at a pace of about $40 billion a month, on top of broader bond buying that totaled roughly $120 billion a month. The intent is to keep credit flowing during a pandemic. The side effect is that 30-year mortgage rates collapse. By January of 2021, the average 30-year fixed hits 2.65%. The lowest rate in the Freddie Mac weekly survey since the survey began in 1971. Simultaneously, the pandemic rewires what people want from a house. Remote work goes from roughly 6% of full days worked to more than 18% almost overnight. People who had been content with a small apartment in a dense city suddenly cannot stand it. Manhattan alone shed about 200,000 households in the early pandemic period. San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles each lost tens of thousands. And those people did not vanish. They went somewhere. Mostly Austin, Phoenix, Boise, Nashville, Tampa, places with already tight inventory that were now hit by a stampede of pandemic savings pre-approvals. National home prices rose roughly 37% between March of 2020 and March of 2022. Austin climbed about 61% over that span. Phoenix about 59%. Boise about 53%. At peak frenzy, thousands of homes were selling for $100,000 or more above asking price in a single month nationwide. If you bought during that window, you locked in something that no longer exists. A monthly payment so low it is almost mythical. And here is the part that mattered for everything that came after. About half of all current U.S. mortgages still carry a rate below 4%. Around 20% are below 3%. Those are not just numbers. They are reasons not to move. Federal Reserve and Atlanta Fed researchers estimated that this lock-in effect alone suppressed roughly 1.5 to 1.7 million home sales that otherwise would have happened. It is the largest single force that froze this market. But by middle 2022, the Fed was no longer fighting a pandemic. It was fighting 9.1% inflation, the highest reading in 40 years. So it did what central banks do. It raised rates. 11 hikes in 16 months. The fastest tightening cycle in 4 decades. Mortgage rates followed. From 3.2% in January of 2022 to 7.08% by October to 7.79% in October of 2023. On the exact same houses people were paying $100,000 over asking for 18 months earlier. That is the trap. The people who bought before the spike are sitting on rates so low they cannot afford to give them up. The people who did not buy are facing prices that never came down and rates more than twice as high. Two completely different generations of buyers, both stuck for completely opposite reasons. Now here is where the story actually starts to update. Through 2024 and 2025, that lock-in effect began to fade. The share of mortgages below 4% dropped from a peak of about 65% in 2022 to roughly 52.5% by mid-2025. The share above 6% climbed to the highest level since 2015. Coldwell Banker's Spring 2026 agent survey found that 1 in 3 home sellers this spring are willingly giving up a rate below 5%. 43% of agents reported a busier spring than the year before. The reasons are not financial. They are human. People had babies, took new jobs, got divorced, retired, aged out of their starter homes. Life kept happening, and life is the only force that eventually beats a low mortgage rate. That slow human pressure is what is actually thawing this market. Not policy. Not a Fed pivot. Not a rate cut. Just time and the accumulated weight of every household that finally decides their 3% mortgage is not worth staying in the wrong house for another 5 years. Which brings us to the part of this story that genuinely matters for you, the person watching this video. Because the macro thaw is real, and it is still not nearly fast enough to fix what the math is doing to first-time buyers. Let me introduce you to someone. Call her Elena. She is 32, works in IT operations at a mid-sized hospital, earns $78,000 a year. No credit card debt. A 750 credit score. $34,000 saved over 3.5 years of skipping vacations and keeping a roommate longer than she wanted. By every standard the system was supposedly built around, Elena is the textbook first-time buyer. The system was designed for her and her parents and their parents. Here's what the system actually offers her in 2026. The median home in her metro is around $390,000. 10% down means a mortgage of $351,000. At 6.44%, her principal and interest is roughly $2,210 a month. Taxes, insurance, and a maintenance reserve push the all-in monthly housing cost to about $3,050. Elena's monthly take-home, after federal and state taxes, is about $4,900. That house would consume 62% of every dollar she actually sees. After housing, she has roughly $1,850 a month for food, transportation, health insurance premiums, student loans, utilities, and the radical concept of occasionally being a person with a social life. She cannot afford this house. Not because she is irresponsible. Not because she has been frivolous. The income required to comfortably carry the median home in her market is closer to $110,000. She earns $78,000. The $32,000 gap is not her failing. It is a structural feature of a market that quietly raised the entry fee while she was building her savings. The first-time buyer share of all home purchases is now 21%. The historical norm is 40%. The median age of a first-time buyer is 40, up from 28 in the early 1990s. Buying at 40 instead of 30 costs roughly $150,000 in lost lifetime equity from the decade of appreciation you do not get to participate in. Baby boomers, by contrast, now make up 42% of all buyers. Half of older boomers are paying entirely in cash. They sold a house they bought in 1998 for $200,000 that is now worth $700,000, walked in with no mortgage dependency, and outbid the 32-year-old with a pre-approval letter. 84% of Gen Z aspiring homeowners say they are delaying at least one major life milestone because of housing. 29% are postponing children. 18% are delaying marriage. 1 in 6 aspiring buyers and 22% of millennials have given up on home ownership entirely. Not paused. Given up. The median first-time buyer being 40 years old is not a quirky data point. It is the statistical fingerprint of a generation that got squeezed for so long that the defining marker of middle-class stability got pushed from early adulthood into middle age. And every institution with a financial stake in your eventual home purchase, the real estate brokerage, the mortgage industry, the home builder, the financial media that depends on their ad revenue, has a structural incentive to tell you that now is a great time to buy. None of them earn anything when you decide the math does not work. This brings me to the question every housing video eventually has to answer. Is this 2008? No. And the reasons it does not matter enormously. In 2006 and 2007, subprime mortgages were about 18 to 21% of all originations. Liar loans, interest-only products, negative amortization mortgages were considered mainstream. In 2024, subprime is about 3 to 4%. The median credit score at origination is around 758, roughly 50 points higher than 2006. In 2009, 26% of all mortgaged properties were underwater. Today, it is roughly 2.2%. Homeowners are sitting on more than $35 trillion in collective equity. Foreclosures in 2024 totaled around 174,000. In 2008, they hit 2.3 million. The 2008 crisis happened because banks lent money to people who could not repay it, based on home values that were largely imaginary. The 2026 situation is almost the inverse. The lending is sound. The borrowers are qualified. The equity is real. The system is structurally durable. It is just structurally unaffordable for new entrants. Progress, technically. So, what should you actually do with this information? First, throw out the binary frame. The housing market is not crashing and it is not booming. It is in a slow, multi-year recalibration where prices grind sideways or modestly upward, while wages slowly catch up, and the lock-in effect fades one human life event at a time. The 5 to 10-year version of this story is gradually getting better. The 6-month version is barely budging. If you are making a decision in the next 12 months, plan for the 6-month version, not the optimistic 10-year one. Second, run your own real numbers, not the market's narrative. The honest rule is that total monthly housing costs should land below 28 to 30% of your gross income, and you should plan to stay at least 7 years to absorb transaction costs and ride out any short-term softness. If the math works at that threshold, buying makes sense. If it does not, stretching to 45% of income because your agent says rates might come down later is how households end up financially trapped in a house they cannot leave. Third, renting and investing the difference is a completely legitimate strategy, not a consolation prize. In a market where the median home costs roughly 5.5 times the median household income, well above the historical ratio of around 4, the math on putting that down payment and mortgage premium money into a diversified index fund can absolutely compete with home ownership over a long horizon. Nobody with a commission incentive will tell you this. The math will. Fourth, if you are buying, look hard at new construction. Builders are still offering meaningful rate buydowns, sometimes to 4.5% or below, because they are sitting on inventory and need to move it. The median new home price is currently running closer to the median existing home price than it has in decades, which almost never happens. Just make sure the incentive is real and not disguising an inflated base price. Run every number twice. Fifth, and this is the one I want you to actually hold on to, the most expensive financial decision of your life is rarely the one you make in a panic. It is the one you make because you finally got tired of waiting. Tired of opening Zillow for the 17th time this week. Tired of going to friends' housewarmings and quietly calculating their monthly payment. Tired of being responsible by every measure and still being on the outside of the thing your parents told you was a basic expectation of adulthood. The exhaustion is real. The pressure is real. It is also the most expensive emotion in personal finance. So here is where I am going to leave it. The housing market in 2026 is genuinely, measurably, better than it was a year ago. That is a real change, and the people who keep telling you it is permanently broken are working from data that is no longer current. The freeze is cracking. Slowly. Reluctantly. But cracking. And the gap between what the median American household earns and what the median American house costs is still around $40,000 wide. That gap closes through one of two things: wages rising for years, or prices grinding sideways for years, or some slow combination of both. There is no policy, no rate cut, no executive order, and no headline that fixes a gap that size in a single year. So the question for you is not whether the market will get better. It already is on the only timeline that matters macroeconomically. The question is whether it will get better fast enough for your specific situation, on your specific timeline, with your specific income. That question almost no one is willing to answer honestly for you, because there is no commission attached to the answer. You have to run your own real numbers, with your own real income, on your own real timeline. The thaw is happening. The gap is still there. Both can be true. And the most powerful financial move you make in 2026 might be the very boring one of waiting another 12 months, while the gap quietly narrows, instead of forcing it shut tonight with a mortgage you cannot actually carry. The math is not your enemy. The pressure to ignore the math is. I am Jenna. I will see you in the next one.